About a month ago, I got news from my dad's relatives that his health had been declining. To ensure that he got the best care possible, I decided to move to his place for some time. My mom and dad were divorced, so dad moved out, and I had to stay with mom. Sure, we had our weekends and holiday visits, but it wasn't the same as having him around all the time. I had a very close bond with my dad, and I just missed him even more after the separation. I always felt like he understood me better than mom and was always there for me. So when I got the news about his health, it felt like the universe was giving me a chance to be there for him the way he'd always been there for me. But life had other plans. Unfortunately, I was not able to help him much, as about a week after my visit, disaster struck and we lost him due to a heart attack. Being dad's only child, I took it upon myself to take care of all the funeral arrangements. As soon as I got the news, I decided to call my mom and let her know that dad was gone. Surely she'd want to know that the father of her child had passed away. But her response? Silence. Dead silence. For a moment, I thought maybe the call had dropped or she hadn't heard me, so I repeated myself. She just said that she heard me the first time and asked, "What do you want me to do about it?" Shock doesn't even begin to cover what I was feeling. It was like being slapped in the face. I was so stunned that I just hung up the phone. I get it. Dad was her ex-husband. She had moved on, remarried some time ago, and started a new chapter in her life. But this wasn't about their failed marriage or any lingering resentment. This was about me losing my father. Couldn't she have mustered up even an ounce of sympathy? A simple, "I'm sorry for your loss," would have sufficed. At that moment, I wanted to have a meltdown, but I didn't have that luxury. There was a funeral to plan, relatives to notify, and paperwork to handle. So there I was, juggling funeral arrangements and trying to keep it together when I got blindsided by some seriously messed up news from back home. It all started when my next-door neighbor at home gave me a call. Her daughter and I had been childhood friends, so I figured she got the news from someone and was just calling to offer condolences. Boy, was I wrong. She wanted to know why I hadn't informed her or her daughter about my supposed plans to move out. Naturally, I was caught off guard by this question. I told her that I had no such plans right now to move out and was, in fact, intending to return home very soon. That's when she dropped the bombshell. My lovely mother had been telling the whole neighborhood that I had suddenly decided to move out. Under that cover, she'd been going through my room, cherry-picking my belongings to either sell off or chuck in the trash. We're talking about stuff I've had since childhood, my guitar, my book collection, even the vintage record player Dad got me for my 16th birthday. I connected the dots and realized the reason behind this impromptu clearance sale, to make room for her new family. That's right. My stuff was being tossed to the curb so my stepdad's kids could have more space. I was so angry and heartbroken that as soon as I ended the call with my kind-hearted neighbor, I called Mom. Before she could even say hello, I lashed out at her, asking how dare she sell my stuff, the stuff that was the last tangible memory of my dad. She sounded flustered, caught completely off guard, and kept asking how I had found out. But I pressed her, needing answers. Finally, she said her husband Greg and Stepkids needed space, and that they deserved to make the house their home too. I was enraged. It wasn't about sharing the space. I had no problem with the kids. In fact, even though I didn't like my stepdad very much, I had a good bond with Ethan and Mia, so I was willing to share everything with them. But to remove my belongings and empty my room while I was away grieving the loss of my father? That was nothing but a betrayal. The thought of my things, my personal memories, being discarded so casually was both sad and infuriating. It was like she was using Dad's death as an excuse to completely erase me from her life. I told her bluntly that what she had done was unforgivable and that the least she could do was give me the money for everything she sold. Her response was the final blow. When her guilt trip did not work, she admitted that she had already spent the money on new gifts for my stepdad's kids. That's right. My childhood memories and prized possessions were all turned into shiny new toys for my step-siblings. All of this when Mom knew that I would be leaving for college in a few months and would have taken almost everything that was in my room. But no, she just wanted to steal everything that I had. Talk about adding insult to injury, right? Out of sight, out of mind, and apparently out of the house too. But my mom was a fool to think that I would just roll over and accept whatever she threw my way. Fate wasn't in her favor either, because during the funeral, my uncle and I had to sort through all of Dad's affairs. While going through his personal belongings, we stumbled upon something I never expected: a will. This completely shocked me because Dad always said he didn't believe in legal documents when it came to family. He used to say, legality destroys relationships. Things should happen because nature intended it, not because the law says so. I never thought in a million years he'd have a will, but there it was, tucked away in a safe deposit box at his bank, when I had no idea existed. Apparently, he set it up after the divorce just to avoid conflict, but left instructions with my uncle to handle things when the time was right. The contents of the will were even more shocking. Not only had Dad never signed the house over to Mom after the divorce, but he had also left it solely to me, his only child. All this time, Mom had been living in a house she thought was hers, completely unaware of the legal reality. Now, with Dad gone, the house was mine. Originally, I was planning to keep quiet about this. I mean, despite everything, she was still my mom, you know? I figured we could work something out, maybe come to some sort of agreement. But after this latest stunt, all bets were off. I was lucky to have my uncle by my side because he took care of the legal side of things. I spent the next few days getting everything in order, had long talks with Uncle Joe about the legal side of things, made some calls to real estate agents, and even started looking into apartment listings. Not for me, mind you, but for Mom and her bunch. Finally, after everything was sorted out, I returned to what was supposed to be my home, bracing myself for the inevitable confrontation. Imagine my mom's surprise when she saw me walk in with my uncle by my side. She was shocked, to say the least. She must have thought that I would be begging her to let me stay in the house, but there was no chance of that happening. Her immediate reaction was to get emotional, trying to play the concerned mother and asking why I had brought a lawyer with me. She even hinted rather dramatically at whether I was planning to sue her. Meanwhile, my stepdad lounged in a chair with a smug look on his face, clearly convinced that I had no legal standing. I asked Mom to sit down for a chat and said I had something important to discuss. I could tell that nobody in this room was going to apologize to me, so I started off calm and asked her if she remembered the details of her divorce from Dad. She again looked very confused, probably wondering where I was going with this. Then I dropped the bomb. My uncle pulled out the property documents we had found, laying them on the table. As my mom and stepdad scanned the papers, I could see the color drain from their faces. My uncle explained that, to avoid any legal battle during the divorce, my dad had moved out but never transferred the property title. Legally, the house was still in his name, and since he had passed away, I was the sole heir. The room fell silent as the weight of the situation settled in. Suddenly, my mom lashed out. She argued that this was unfair, that she had been my dad's wife and deserved a share of the property. She tried to assert her right to the house, pointing out that she had lived there for years, making it her home too. Greg, my stepdad, also chimed in, now not as smug as earlier, but clearly scared that his free shelter was slipping from his hands. He said that they had nowhere else to go, and that it was unjust for me to take over the house. My uncle, ever the voice of reason, tried to calm the situation. He explained that the law was clear. As my dad's only child, I was the rightful owner of the property. He reminded them that this wasn't about stripping them of their home, but about recognizing my legal rights, which had been overlooked in their haste to rearrange the house and sell my belongings. He suggested that we find a reasonable solution, possibly including compensation for the items that were sold. But my mom wasn't having it. She started to accuse me of being heartless and ungrateful, of trying to punish her for moving on with her life. She claimed that she had sacrificed a lot for me, and now, in her time of need, I was turning my back on her. It was a manipulative play, attempting to guilt-trip me into robbing me of my rightful claim. When that didn't work, she said she would take this to court and sue me to get what was hers. Through it all, I just sat there watching the show. It was like all those years of pent-up frustration, all the times I bit my tongue to keep the peace, were finally paying off. I finally spoke up and said that she could go ahead with that and waste both our time and her money, but we all knew what the outcome would be in the end. I made it clear that I was not going to be unreasonable. I expressed that I was willing to give them time to find a new place, but I firmly stated that the house was now mine, and sooner or later, they were getting out of this place. I mentioned that after what had happened while I was away, it was time for my mother to move on. The drama didn't end there. Just when I thought we'd hit peak chaos, my stepdad decided to make everything more tense. He stormed out of the room, and for a brief moment, I thought maybe he'd finally accepted defeat. But I was very wrong. About 20 minutes later, he came barging back in, but this time he wasn't alone. He had brought Ethan and Mia with him. The kids looked confused and a little scared, clearly not understanding why they'd been dragged into this mess. He pointed to his children and expressed that I was not just evicting them but also taking away shelter from innocent kids, questioning if that was truly what I wanted. I could tell that he was mocking me, and with his exaggerated concern, attempting to paint me as the villain in the situation. I'll be honest, for a moment, that got to me, and I hesitated going forward with the plan. If I kicked these kids out of the house they had started seeing as their home, then I wasn't any better than my mom. My uncle looked at me in a concerned manner and told me not to get trapped in their manipulative schemes, and that the best we could do right now was come to a settlement that was fair to everyone. So, we finally came to a decision that nobody would be kicked out of the house. As soon as my mom and stepdad heard the news, they relaxed, probably thinking they'd won with their little emotional blackmail stunt. The relief on their faces was clearly visible. Mom even made a move like she was going to hug me, but I held up a hand, stopping her in her tracks. This was not the end. The only way they would be allowed to stay in the house was by paying rent. It would be a fair market rate, determined by an independent assessor, and we would sign an agreement to ensure proper transactions. The change in the room was instant. It was like I'd flipped a switch from relief to rage. Mom's face went from grateful to furious in about half a second flat. Stepdad looked like he was about to pop a blood vessel. Mom started screaming that she was not paying rent to live in her own home. I gently reminded her once again that it was not her home anymore, and considering that she tried to sell off all my stuff and kick me out, I think rent was more than fair. Uncle stepped in, reasoning that this was a very generous offer and that it would ensure my step-siblings were also raised in this home. For a moment, it looked like they might actually see sense. The kids were nodding, probably relieved they wouldn't have to move schools or leave their friends. But then stepdad decided to take things to a whole new level. Before anyone could react, stepdad shoved Uncle, screaming that he put me up to everything and calling him all sorts of names. Everything after that happened in a blur. I rushed to help Uncle Joe up. Mom was screaming at stepdad to calm down and holding him back. My step-siblings looked horrified, backing away from their raging father. Things got real intense. My uncle got up and took out his phone to call 911. He warned Greg that he should think very carefully about his next move as assault is a serious offense, and he also had a witness here. Stepdad looked like he was about to launch himself at Uncle Joe again, but Mom grabbed his arm, finally seeming to realize how out of control things had gotten. Eventually, the cops showed up and took statements from everyone. Stepdad tried to play it cool, but the officers weren't buying his "it was just a misunderstanding" routine. In the end, when Uncle didn't press any charges, the cops gave stepdad a stern warning and told him to cool off elsewhere for the night. As he was leaving, he told me that this wasn't over. After the dust settled, I laid down the law for one last time. I told Mom and the kids they could stay, but stepdad was no longer welcome. Rent would start next month, non-negotiable. Mom tried to argue, but one look at Uncle was enough to shut her up. As for the kids, I pulled them aside later, told them I was sorry they got caught in the middle of all this, and promised them that no matter what happened between the adults, they'd always have a place to stay if they needed it.